Very much. So my name is Alexey Sidorenko. I'm the Senior Program Manager and Engagement and Development Officer for Equality.org. Historically, I've been known as a co-founder and a director at Teplitsa Technologies for Social Good, a 14-year-old project started initially by Internews Network. And right now, still functioning. I'm still the director there as an independent entity. I received my PhD in geography from Moscow State University, and I still have an unfinished master's in cultural sciences at the Warsaw University. I work Global Voices Online, Carnegie Moscow Center, among other places, and I'm the co-founder and the award-winning Health Map, Карта помощи, from 2010. Yeah, where we received the RUNET award for this, and helped over 1,000 of people, suffering from the wildfires. I, aside from my PhD, I hold the PMP certification and IBM AI Product Owner certification. I'm not a data scientist myself, so uh, um, my angle at AI and prompt engineering is very practical. I'm not no longer a researcher, even though I had a significant part of my life in research. But I hope that what I'll be telling you about will be relevant to any area of your work, including research. So today's agenda, we will talk about prompts, and we'll talk about large language models and to understand how large language models process instructions, tokens, and context windows, design structured prompts for research, analytical, and policy-oriented tasks, apply various techniques to improve depth and precision, use role definition constraints and stepwise reasoning to enhance output quality, identify bias, hallucinations, and uncertainty in model responses, and evaluate and validate AI-generated content for academic and professional use. So my first question and my sort of interactive slides will be in orange. If the slide is in orange, so it's feel free to share your comments. LLMs progress so fast and so quickly, and my experience was that whenever I'm trying to explain something about prompt engineering, there are a lot of people in the room who already are quite savvy and already quite experienced in this. So obviously we're adults. I assume there are adults here, and it's adult education. So in adult education, it's very important that it's not just lecturer who made a little bit more preparation for this particular time slot, but it's also we were learning from each other. So my first question to you is, how did good prompt engineering, I assume you've done some prompt engineering, even though you might not know about this, and maybe you knew about this, help you in your previous experience?
I have a comment. My name is Peter. I'm a grad student at Georgetown. And I think for me, the main thing that good prompt engineering does is it ensures that you get the outcomes that you desire. For example, oftentimes LLMs will just assume you want a certain kind of output. So if you put really specific criteria of desired output and oftentimes refine that prompt further based on when you're getting good versus bad output, it's been really a game changer. And I've been storing my prompts in markdown files in my Obsidian library, and that's been a big game changer as well as using scales. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Obsidian user. Wonderful. That's so certainly shows a level. Thank you very much. One more, maybe two more comments, two responses. Yes, so benefits of good prompt engineering is, first of all, the control, is that you get what you ask for. And to rephrase the old adage, garbage in, garbage out, you get quality, candy in, candy out. So if you get something, if you have a good prompt, you might probably have a good result as well. Then the second part is risks. You reduce hallucinations and AI bullshit. So I think it's also very important, and of course, efficiency. If you know how to design prompts well, you save yourself time. And probably you don't scream at your chat GPT, and you can reduce any reactions if you ever screamed or wrote something really nasty to your chat GPT. Here's a little meme that I find particularly funny, and it's a good illustration about what is a weak prompt. Is this mushroom edible? So yeah, I mean, if there are no constraints, if there is, like if there is no context, so ChatGPT probably would, tell you that it's edible, and then the most sort of unnerving sentence, "You're right," or sometimes "You're absolutely right." Yeah, and then something that completely contradicts with the previous answer. So we will start then in order to get into various techniques, and of course we'll speak a bit more about the techniques. It's important to understand how large language models work, process instructions and tokens, and context windows. And I think that there are uh, several concepts that are important to understand. So, of course, pre-training, the large language model learns general language patterns from massive, we're talking like several libraries level text data, tokenization, text is split into smaller units. Positional encoding, the model tracks the order of tokens in a sequence, and of course, all you need is attention. Attention mechanism, the revolutionary idea from the 2018, that sort of changed the whole AI game, I believe. The model that focuses on relevance part of the input when generating each token. A bit away from theory and towards what we will be discussing in detail are important concepts like context window. I think that this one is particularly important for any prompt engineering. The model uses a limited amount of text as its working memory, and different models have different context windows. There are also different techniques. I will not go into all sorts of abbreviations and the weird titles that the AI data scientists and the AI researcher use for the next sort of technique. But let's try to stay in the domain of understandable human language. So next token prediction generates output by predicting the most likely next token step by step and probability distribution. At each step, multiple possible tokens are considered with different likelihoods. And of course, sampling controls randomness in output generations and what we receive. Then model reproduces patterns learned during training. It interprets tasks based on the structure, wording, and cues in the prompt, and we'll talk a little bit more about the differences between instructions, prompts, memory, projects, and chats, and so on, and instruction tuning, training that improves the model's ability to follow instructions. And then finally, role conditioning adjusts output based on assigned roles or perspectives in the prompt. So I know that there are only four, at least from what I know from the survey, really, people who consider themselves really deep into data science. I think that for everybody else, at least I assume so, the word token is something not exactly, like tangible. So my question is, you probably heard Baby Shark. So, just a wild guess. How many tokens are in Baby Shark? Just to illustrate what exactly it is. So there are 328 tokens in Baby Shark, and you can see that they are there are much more characters than tokens, and a rule of thumb is that one token generally corresponds to 4 characters for common English text, and you can see the efficiency, especially in a repetitive song like Baby Shark, that it sort of allows to look at the uh, at our language in a very different way. Namely, also that each token has its token ID, and the same baby shark to do can be translated into this. And of course, it will be different sequence for depending on the selection. And altogether, all these tokens are put into a multi-dimensional space, and the model then derives probabilities and derives outputs based on what is happening in this multi-dimensional space. So context window is the amount of text, amount of tokens a model can use at one time, and includes your prompt, system instructions, conversation history, and model's previous outputs. And it limits how much information the model can use and affects long documents and complex tasks. And this is why it's particularly important for longer tasks. And you can see that, for example, if you work with on a big document or a line of code, at some point you see that the model becomes sillier and sillier, and you're like, well, what is happening? Yeah, it's the sort of a significant details or some details from the past, if it's a long chat, are being forgotten. Just to for your comparison, if you sort of still lack the understanding, or it's hard for you to contextualize what does it mean, 1 million tokens, or 1,000 tokens. It's just a random number. I just made a little conversion here for A4 pages, or I think in the United States would be letter pages. And so 1,000 tokens is about 3/4 of A4 page, and 1 million tokens is from 700 to 750 pages. Now, different models have different capacity. For example, ChatGPT, Model 5 class, they have the capacity. The context window is about 300 pages. Anthropic has up to 750 pages, and Google boasts even 2 million tokens in its most expensive models, which is quite significant. And at the same time, this does not include outside source of information, the so-called RAG, retrieval augmented generation, and I'll speak a bit about this a little bit later. So once we covered the main concepts behind the sort of theoretical concepts behind the way large language models understand our instructions, let's talk a little bit about the particular elements. So the first, of course, element, as the title of this lecture suggests, is the prompt. So it's really easy. It defines the immediate objective. It's a primary signal. And it's also, I think it's very important to think when it comes to prompts in terms of signals, that it's not a direct command. So it's not a SQL command like analyze this table, like get me everything from this date to this. No, it's not the exact, it's sort of a recommendation for the algorithm to provide you something in return. So prompts drive what information is pulled into, or drive what information is put into context. Instructions, on the other hand, and previously, for example, ChatGPT and other like Watson large language models kept them separated, prompts from instructions. Right now, I guess for simplicity reasons, they've been merged, but at the same time, still and also it's still different when you, for example, use API and you access prompts not through the graphic user interface, but through, for example, a Python script. You still sometimes can separate those two entities. So instructions, and it's a behavioral control layer, they are persistent or semi-persistent constraints. They influence style, the reasoning approach, the output format, and compete with prompt. So there's sort of a competition and context if unclear or conflicting. So they can be contradicting with your prompt. And sometimes this also is the reason of inconsistencies in the output that you receive. So the chat, the sort of an interaction, a session, if you are using API, is the sequence of prompts and responses. And the chat provides short-term continuity, and recent messages are included in the context window, while older content may be truncated or summarized. Now, I guess my question is, because not everybody does that, so the question is, how many of you use projects, either in Claude or ChatGPT, for your work? You can comment, and you would like to comment on the project, that would be really great, because it's interesting to learn about your experience in this. Uh, Thanks. So the projects organize interaction across multiple steps and files that provide structured access to sources and prior work, and they do not expand memory. They manage what enters and enable continuity via retrieval and conversational history. Then come sources and its external knowledge layer. And right now, if previously, just a few iterations ago, any ChatGPT project would have sources and instructions. Right now, or like files and instructions. Right now, it has just sources and the prompt, and it assumes to learn throughout the entire project. So it's stored outside. The important to understand that this data is stored outside of the context window. Sometimes you can request to access it, but if the file is too big, and later we will have an example like this, we can. You'll have to be very precise in the way you structure your communication with the chat to get what you need. I guess one more question, and I can see that like the question do not always get the answers, but if you ever use drag systems with your prompts, it would be great if you can share your experiences as well. Finally, maybe sometimes when you use ChatGPT or like, you would hear, or Perplexity or Claude, you would see like memory update. So memory is a persistent signal layer, and it stores preferences, long-term preferences or recurring context, and it influences responses across in chats and projects. So it's a meta structure and not fully visible and very selectively applied. There are still quite a few quite a few questions about the concept of memory, with large language models, and it's also the problem is that it evolves too fast. So these were the basics, and now we're going to the next section, which is this design of structured prompts for research, analytical, and policy-oriented tasks. So the structure of a good prompt usually consists of 5 main components. The first is task, of course. So action, objective type of analysis. For example, analyze key changes in Russian energy policy. The second is context, background, scope, time frame, domain, focus on development since 2022, expert strategy. So you add something. You might add a file that would say like, hey, I would like to this is my context. Do, for example, research on energy policy, and use it as a context. Constraints, limits, exclusions, audience, level of detail, limit to trends, jargon. For example, very often I mainly use prompts for fundraising. So, for example, many fundraising forms use have a limitation of words. For example, if I see that there is a background section that has only 500 characters, so therefore I just like limit your response to 500 characters. Output format, structure, format, presentation style, and it can. And I will talk a little bit later about the output, but I think that very important to understand is that you can. It's not about just like output as a flat list or output as a table. You can actually output as very complex file formats like XML, like JSON, and you can get really complex things also on a recurring basis. For example, you want to collect some news every week. You want to access certain file that changes regularly, and you want to output something, some very specific file format. You can do that with a large language models. And of course, evaluation criteria. You can set the quality standards, reasoning requirements. For example, you can say highlight uncertainty or distinguish facts from assumptions. So the outputs, as I said, my most common use case is when I do something and it's like, well, I need it as a table, so output it as a table. I use the columns to separate my parameters and ID name parameter 1, parameter 2, and so on and so on. In factbutcher.com, the fact-checking service that we've developed with my colleague, we use API call with a request to output the data from GPT as a JSON, and JSON has its own syntaxes. So this is also quite useful for us. It saves us a significant amount of coding, even though I need to say that unfortunately we still find inconsistencies in the output quality. So sometimes it produces some weird characters, and this is something that we haven't exactly like understood why it happens. So be aware that the reliability of outputs and more complex outputs is still not 100%. So the next part is understanding what is a weak or a strong prompt. So would you say that analyze Russian energy policy is a weak or a strong? So of course it's a weak prompt because it doesn't have context, it doesn't have limitations, it doesn't have an output. So with this prompt you would probably get a really bad output. But here's a slightly better prompt. I think that from my experience, here's the example that I have. So here's the use case. Some of you, I don't know if you've heard, if you are familiar with the European context. So in Europe, there is a database openly published, which is about, it's not huge, but it's still more than you can normally sort of go through just without any analytic skills. It's about 20 megabytes CSV file with and corresponding XLS files with the organization, all the European organizations that ever won Horizon Europe grants. It's a prestigious grant, so you can and it's a pretty interesting database. You can understand what organizations are sort of winning funding, what consortia do they engage in, and what I did recently, I uploaded the organization.xlx files, and I just decided, okay, will I need a Python script to analyze it, or I can ask ChatGPT to do that. And of course, I first tried with basic script, basic prompt, which said like find all projects that have a certain organization. I will not share it here. Find all of them that at least this organization where this organization was part of the consortium. And surprisingly, the ChatGPT said like, even though it had the file uploaded, I'm unable to load the organization due to its file structure. And this is not true, right? This is not true, therefore, but is it the only outcome? No, it's not. So with a slightly different prompt, act as we are using the role pattern here. Act as a database retrieval agent. You have two sources of the official blah 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 database, and they're interconnected. They're organizations who won grants at winning project. Usually, each project is won by a consortium organization. So I provide the context to this. And also, one organization can be a winner in multiple projects. Also, some organizations can be coordinators or lead, and you can find this information in the column role. Find all projects where organization X is a participant. And the organization, and I get a much better answer. And this was really the difference between an absolutely weak prompt that ChatGPT was too lazy to respond. And according to some research, we know that ChatGPT provides us with a suboptimal response. Somebody can call it a lazy response because it also has explicitly or implicitly logic to save resources, especially, we know that ChatGPT, for example, as well as other large language models, they spend more money than they earn. Still, they're in the spending money phase. So, and you can sort of feel whenever if you work a lot with large language models, you can see that sometimes they really do not want to do some task because the task is really big, and they were not sort of don't want. They obviously don't have any emotions, but they sort of try to avoid feel full sort of executing certain tasks. And of course, it's quite interesting to see those. And then the more precise you are, the better you explain what you want, and naming the source. And also what I do, and I'll talk about this later, also you can first of all upload the file, name it, and then ask some questions, some test questions. Hey, what is the number of organization in this database? And if you get some generic number, it means like the file is not in the context window. and it means that you will not get any good information. But if you receive the correct answer, let's say you have 20,000 organizations in this database, means now, okay, we can talk, and we can and you can do. And of course, unfortunately, right now they're still not exactly reliable, but you can save yourself a lot of time by accessing the data from the added sources, and do some maybe random checks once per 10 or per 20 responses, just to see if it matches. Because unfortunately, right now, I cannot guarantee you that that any source that you are using, and for example, it can be all sorts of. For example, if you're working with Russia, you can analyze quite a lot of tables that Russian Statistical Committee has, and save yourself a lot of time. But you need to double check whether it actually works well or not. And of course, prompt engineering helps in that. So the next section will cover 2 points from today's agenda: is apply various techniques to improve depth and precision, and use role definition, constraints, and stepwise reasoning to enhance output quality. So the first pattern is instruction-based prompt, and this is the most basic prompt you can ever get. Summarize the key changes in Russian energy policy since 2022 in 5 bullet points. It starts with a clear action verb. It has a typical structure, task, scope, format, and best used when you need quick, direct answers. Tasks are simple or well-defined. No deep reasoning or perspective is needed. So please, if you use instruction-based prompting, please add a reaction or plus or anything in your chat, unless you're driving, of course. The next one is a role-based prompt. Act as a policy analyst and access the impact of EU sanctions on energy sector. And here, in addition to the instruction-based prompt, you add the role. And I need to say that I really use this pattern a lot, and I think it's really, really helpful because this part act as not just sort of like doesn't put the hat of a policy analyst to the chat GPT, but it opens up an entire domain specific perspective. And you can try by yourself, trying the same prompt, for example, with and without based prompting. You will get very different results, especially when it comes to narrow domains. For example, as I said, I'm mostly use prompt engineering for fundraising. So when I create a project and I start a chat to apply for a particular institution, it's I write not just act as a professional fundraiser, because this would give you quite a wide domain. I say like you are act as a fundraising development agent for a particular foundation, which means that large language models would have to access and to understand the context of this organization, and to maybe retrieve some data from, I don't know, from various fora, for different sources that it has vacuum cleaned from the internet, to come up with okay, what does it mean to be a fundraiser, for a fundraiser development agent, whatever, for this particular institution. Recently, what I did, and what I can also recommend. So I've coded a little Python script that collects the context for whatever you are doing. And I think, I don't know whether you'll be covering vibe coding in large language models, but for example, when you write, you can say like act as a coding specialist, writing parsing programs, and write me a program, a little Python script that I can start, or any language, but usually Python if you're using parsing, that can do this and that. For me, for example, it was that I needed to get more context when I'm writing a particular application. So my simple parsing script was getting all the information about the particular funding call, and in addition to that, all the important context that would sort of help me understand what this foundation cares about, what are its main priorities. I would not trust exactly the parsing part, um, to the large language model because of safety reasons. Their parsing part and real time access to internet is really unreliable. Even though ChatGPT and others, unless you are using one of their browsers, or Atlas, or whatever, Comet, um, you can still see that this function of direct access from your prompt doesn't really work that well. So ideally, you sort of pre-parse the information, add it to the context of your call, and add a role. And then I think, at least in my understanding, it creates the best experiences, the best and the most consistent quality. And we can work on this. I mean, once again, I apply it for fundraising. You can apply it for research. For example, you need to analyze the fora of truck drivers in southern Russia to understand how did the reactions of truck drivers changed throughout the last 5 years. Yeah, you can vibe code a script that would scrape everything or use any existing tool. It took me like 30 minutes to vibe code something like this, and it works really, really well. Then you sort of suck it in your file or database or whatever you want, and then add it to your project, and then sort of ask to act as a sociologist, or whoever. And then this, or an analyst, and so on, and then it produces really good results. For example, on a much smaller scale, what I recently did is that every year we write, we issue, as Teplitsa, we issue surveys, and it's a regular Google spreadsheet. So usually we would get 150 responses, and it's a simple Excel table. So this time I download the Excel table, asked to apply the hat of a marketing specialist, marketing and product owner specialist, and asked to analyze the survey. And I saved myself at least, I would say, like 1 day of work. And the results, and of course I specifically checked whether the algorithm got things right, and so on. But it was amazing. I was really, really surprised that the output file from any Google table or SurveyMonkey can be analyzed so well with the help of a tool, especially when you add a role-based prompt. Then the next pattern is step-by-step prompt. and once again, also put a reaction. Please enter the reaction or a plus or whatever text you want to write in the chat bot in the chat section. If you've ever used role-based prompt. The next pattern is step-by-step prompt. When you want to when you want to go into more deeper reasoning, and you want to avoid shallow answers, and you want sort of to co-create the results together with the large language models. And sometimes actually, in order to test and to get the better results, I start with a prompt something like, what are the what are the biggest news you've heard about Russian civil society in the last 3 months? And through this, I sort of I try to understand, what is the current level of large language model update. Like how updated is the current database? What does it see? What are its blind spots, and so on and so on. And if I can see that the result that I'm getting is okay, then I can ask more questions. I say like, okay, like, can you find all the instances, for example, of civil society organizations closing in the last year because of the financial crisis? And then I know that I would get better results because my first prompt provided an important context that created a certain vector where ChatGPT or other model should look into. And this already, my first question, sort of this opening question, created a much better result than if I would just say like, oh, find me all the incidents with civil society organizations being closed down in the last year. And once again, yeah, please share if you use this pattern. The fourth pattern is constraint-based prompt, and explain the impact of sanctions and energy experts in under 150 words using bullet points and no technical jargon. For me, what I see a lot, ChatGPT constantly writes in headline, line, big sort of a list with bold and and so on and so on. So it's really there is a lot of useless information in this output. And for me, and of course, you can say always do something, and then this preference of yours will be added to the memory. So this will be, like this will sort of, unless you change it, ChatGPT will remember that you always want to output something as a flat list, or as a table. I'm very, very careful about what I do with the memory and to like always do something. So, but for example, within one chat, if I need only flat lists, and I prefer more simplified lists, I say like, well, like within this chat or within this project, only write flat lists. And of course, sometimes it's important to use this prompt if you have a certain specific audience. For example, you have to create a document for European bureaucrats, or for 3-year-olds, or for, I don't know, for elderly. Or yeah, so this prompt, when you focus on the output and you focus on the constraints, where it constrains you. For example, sometimes it's not just the output, but is a constraint, but you don't want to mention something, or you don't want to get into something because I know that there could be an interference. Then constraints are particularly important, and you might start with them. Then comes and this is very popularized. One-shot prompt, few-shot prompts, and so on and so on. So I will follow, because one-shot prompt is the instructional prompt. It's something that, or it's sort of a like, use this as an example. So it's pretty basic. Few-shot prompt is a bit more complex. Is that when you say like, I want to classify, and classification, and it's something that large language model is doing, I would say, better, even more expensive than typical machine learning, is the classification. And you can say policy, analysis, or opinion, and you can provide the example of what is a policy. You can provide an example of what is an opinion, and now classify everything based on this few shot example. You basically need just three clean examples, where you label sort of certain inputs, and then you can label, as I would say, as precisely, the outputs. And I think that, and of course, it's I invite you to debate, but in the more complex classification problems, like, for example, emotional analysis, more things that where you have to have sort of a more complex reasoning skills. Large language models, at least in my experience, show better results than typical machine learning. Then the key element is that in this type of prompting is that you have to provide examples before the task. You need to be sort of really put a lot of effort in how you design the examples. So you cannot, like, if you provide bad examples, then you will have bad classification mechanism. But and it's particularly important because few shot prompts are used sometimes, not sometimes, very often, when you have a little app, when you want to send the request to the API, then it really helps. But once again, it's very important that you design it well, provide good examples, and you constantly monitor through tools like LangFuse what are the inputs and the outputs from the specification, and then update your prompts later. Iterative prompting is also quite widely used. So, but it's not something that you provide the iterations, but when you when you ask the chatbot itself to constantly being, thinking after producing something, how to critique and how to improve it. So it's a multi-step interaction with refinement. And you can actually say that in a memory. I think that early in my early on, when I was experimenting with different prompts, I added something like always critique and provide improvement. And it's right now it's something that I always get after each interaction with the large language models. So with this iterative prompting, it can be both automatic and per base. So, for example, right now when I write something, I have a role named evaluator, because many applications, almost all of them, are evaluated by somebody. And for example, if you write I don't know, a PhD, you also have a reviewer, right? So after you are done, what you can do is, like, you can write a prompt or create a separate agent, so to speak, act as a reviewer, as an evaluator, and provide these evaluator with a list of criteria, so that the criteria, so that your result, your output is checked upon, and like with the evaluation criteria. It's very helpful sometimes. For example, recently we've been applying for a grant, and we've just done a very routine check. We said, like, well, act as an evaluator, and it was like a 40 pages long application, and we found out that we simply missed one important task, but which could basically render all our work absolutely useless. And we were able to fix it last minute because the evaluator agent found the discrepancy between the application rules and what we produced, and we were able to fix it really, really quickly. So in this regard, I can definitely recommend iterative prompting as a part of your prompting technique, so that you produce good results. At the same time, it's very important to note that the efficiency and sort of a sense of this iterative prompting is very much depends what you feed the system, because and it's easy when you have a very clear list of evaluation criteria. So if you have, for example, a European grant with a very, very clearly listed evaluation criteria, then the evaluator role will work really well. But if it's not, then it can become a problem, and you might start fixing your work or whatever your result of the prompt in a very sort of a wrong way, going away from the desired result. And this is obviously not the outcome you are looking. So the last part is identify bias, hallucinations, uncertainty, and model responses, and evaluate and validate AI-generated content. And I would just for this section, what I did is just I shared some of the prompts that might help you to analyze your own work. For example, this one, very, very sort of a basic, lies on the surface. Analyze, answer for bias. You can also add a role. Act as a critical researcher from a particular university that specializes in identifying bias, or impersonate an author who wrote a book on bias. Most probably, ChatGPT or other model had illegally scanned this book, and they probably know what the book is about. And therefore, such role-based prompts can be helpful. But even without getting into roles, you can ask what perspectives are missing or underrepresented. This task is really well done by ChatGPT or any other model. What sense does this answer make? Are they justified? Rewrite this analysis from an alternative perspective. Rewriting in general is a very powerful tool to test your narrative or to test your output. We once on our hackathons, we had this absolutely amazing tool that, and it was promoted as a tool for critical media reading. And the tool took propaganda materials published by some absolutely worse Russian propaganda and turned it into a Medusa style, Medusa independent news article, and vice versa. It then took Medusa style articles and turned it into an absolutely worse, horrible piece of propaganda just by rewriting it. And I think that this is, I particularly find it quite interesting, because I think that for AI, it doesn't make sense. It's just word game, like basically a bunch of probabilities that it's working with, like multidimensional space. But for us as humans, a rewrite of the same text from a different perspective, from an alternative perspective, can be really insightful. So just for fun, try this. It can be quite good. So, and of course, what would a critic of this argument say? This is, I would say, also basic. Mm, I think that one of the books, I guess it was never split the difference. It had an exercise called insults audit. So it's sort of like you can make an audit of all the insults you can get to this text, and it's good to have it before you publish. For example, maybe you can find something that you'd like to fix. Identifying hallucinations. So as I said, when you add a source to your prompt, run a quick test. Ask to produce a response based on the question that you already know. How many organizations are here? What is the maximum grant amount in this application? Or for example, for how long is the certain cybersecurity policy of Russian Federation? When is the end of this cybersecurity policy of the Russian Federation? 2030 or 2027? This definitely helps, and it's very important to run those quick tests before you work with sources, so that you know that AI accesses them properly. Then the prompts might include provide references to the facts. Sometimes especially when I parse news, and sometimes I get some absolutely, painful results, some absolutely sloppy, pseudo text. It's good to provide evidence to each statement you make, or provide references to each statement that you make. And then once when I was writing this, I got a response like, "Oh, so you want like fact-based stuff?" And then the output became completely different. And I'm like, yeah, thank you. So yeah, it's also very important that unless you say it, the machine just wants to make you happy. It wants to produce you something that looks cool and looks like as if it fulfills your task. It doesn't, and it really requires some additional work to make the results actually factual and evidence-based. Then, of course, identify any claims in this answer that may be inaccurate. Highlight statements that are likely based on assumptions. Also, what I really like about large language models is you can put any statement and say, now write all the assumptions that are packed inside this piece of text. And sometimes this is also very, very insightful. What kind of assumptions are packed inside of a text snippet? What kind of theories are the foundation of somebody's statement? So this is also quite useful and also quite interesting. Which part of these answer are most likely to be fabricated or uncertain, and list all factual claims that indicate which should be fact checked. Then finally, identifying uncertainty. You can ask what are the main uncertainties or unknowns in this analysis. You can ask about the black swans. What I do, for example, I like to ask what are the risks Please create me a risk register. Sometimes risk register is required for many tasks. And I would say AI works really well because yeah, it's a very AI easy for AI task to create risks or identify uncertainties. It's much better. It works in this regard much better than most humans. Mm, separate quickly, separate clearly, and rewrite these answer with explicit statements. And I think that once again, rewriting also is something that AI does really well. So it can definitely help you. So I'd like to move towards question and answers. We'll still have 20 minutes. And before that, I'd like to say that what are my own life hacks when using from ChatGPT? Yeah, I'm using ChatGPT. I'm thinking about moving to Claude. Uh, but projects is one of the most useful functions or features that ChatGPT has. I think that it's particularly important if you are doing recurring tasks. One large task per chat within the project. It also helps, for example, to have all the necessary documents and pieces of text in one context window. For example, for me, it's application. For you, might be a paper. But for example, if you have like on one hand research papers, it's good to have a project called, uh, let's say, the researcher. And then if you need a lawyer, you have a special project called the lawyer and the sports couch. So these sort of roles are separated in the project, and within that you would have task per chat. I think that's more superior architecture than have separate project per activity. I tried this and I can see that then you have to create another project that start new. But if you get all the necessary sources, in one project, and then you have repeating tasks like article number one, article number two, submission to this, submission to that. So this is actually you get the intended results much faster. The third life hack is that always make sure that the system sees and understands what is the contents of the file. And believe me, right now it can consume huge databases. And this means that you can do a lot of research much faster than before. And of course, the last one that I use a lot because I'm sort of a tired typing, and also sometimes for me, I'm not an English native speaker. So sometimes it's very difficult for me to express what I really want to say. But actually talking and using the microphone and say, my wife says that I already have my chat GPT voice, really helps to sort of to correct and provide the uh, to provide it more in a more efficient way and a faster way what the nuances that you want to be used in another iteration of the chat GPT, because we write differently from how we talk, and the way we talk also has a lot of useful information that AI can process much better than us when we type, when we transform our speech to actually whatever we are typing.